Thank you for listening to the BjjBrick Podcast. We'll be bringing you Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and good times. We hope to flatten your Jiu-Jitsu learning curve, help you get the most out of your grappling ability, and meet your goals both on and off the mat.
Welcome back to the BjjBrick Podcast. Today we have episode 270. Today we have on Katie Elliott, and I'm here with my partners in crime, Joe Thomas, Byron Jabara, also known as the Heckle and Jekyll of podcasting. How are you guys today?
Heckle here. I'm doing fine. Does that mean I get to heckle you throughout the show? Is that what that is?
What's new? Normally Byron heckles me, so this will be a little different with Joe heckling me. Byron will just Jekyll me.
I'm not sure what that means, but I'm happy to attempt to Jekyll Gary. That sounds terrible. Oh man, I like it, Gary.
Keep your hands to yourself. Stop Jekyling me.
We have a great interview. I'm excited to bring this to you guys. Katie Elliott. She is her website is elliottperformanceandnutrition.com. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. I got into a kind of a conversation with her based on an article and really learned a lot from her. So, hey, why don't we get you on the show and we'll just talk about this stuff. She's a triathlete, and the way they view nutrition and how that affects your performance. Like the science is way ahead of what we have for jiu-jitsu. And so why not learn from some sport that has a well-developed base of knowledge in those categories. So if you, I think the relation for me is a lot of times, hopefully less, but sometimes I go train and I train terrible. I just feel like I'm off. And sometimes I go and I train and I feel great. I'm like, everything works. That some of it might be mental, but a lot of that could be what did I eat yesterday, what did I eat today, and how am I doing, hydration levels, that sort of thing. And so it's important to learn about that and how that affects you when you're on the mat. And so that's what Katie's bringing to us today during the interview.
You know, Byron, this is going to be definitely helpful for me. That's one thing I don't eat as well as I should. And kind of like what you're saying, I've noticed days when I do eat terrible or not so good, I don't have as much energy on the mat. I can't roll for as long. I'm slower, and my mind's not in it as much. So to perform at your best, nutrition is a big part, and Katie's going to teach us a lot today.
Yep, that'll be coming up pretty soon here, and I think we'll all learn something during that because, like I said, it's outside the base of what we normally talk about. So that was great. I appreciate her sharing her insight and wisdom. And Joe's got a little story to tell us about some off-the-mat wisdom or off-the-mat lesson.
Yeah, each week we bring something that we have learned from off the mat and drag it on the mat or vice versa. And mine generally have to do with skateboarding or my grandson Sebastian, and this week is no different. My wife shared a little video the other day. Sebastian celebrated his second birthday, and I put together one of those balance bikes for him. It's a little bike with no pedals, and the theory is that the kids just kind of scoot along on it and they learn their balance. And we have friends that tell us that their kids went straight from one of these balance bikes to a two-wheeler with no training wheels. So we thought we'd give that a try. But the interesting thing is the video my wife shared was he hadn't had that thing a day, and he's got it laid out in his little workshop there at the house, and he's got tools on it like he's trying to modify that thing and make it faster. And it never ceases to amaze me how industrious this kid is. I mean, he's always working. You can't take the garbage out without him wanting to get a hand on the garbage can and help you drag it out. And so my wife and I, we just really appreciate that. It amazes us. And I sometimes wonder where he gets it from. And the answer is actually pretty simple, is for the last year or better, my wife and I have just been very busy. And he sees that when I'm home, I'm working all the time. And that's what he sees, and he's modeling that behavior. And so kind of looking at that and thinking, how can that help me do some of the things that I want to do in jiu-jitsu better? One of the things I want to do in jiu-jitsu is help other people get better. And if that's one of your goals, learning a lot about jiu-jitsu, learning a lot about training and practice methodologies, getting good at articulating those thoughts and ideas to other people are all good ways to help other people get better at jiu-jitsu. But really, your behavior is going to rub off on your teammates a lot more than the things that you say or the things that you write on Facebook or whatever. And so the guy that shows up for class early, the guy that takes it serious from start to finish, the guy that doesn't take any rounds off, the guy that puts 100% into the learning the technique and drilling the technique, even if it's something he finds boring or something he doesn't fit into his game, that student will be listened to by the other students more than somebody that has a more lackadaisical approach to training. So this life lesson I'm bringing on the mats, I'm directing directly at myself. And I'm saying if I can get better at modeling that behavior, I'll have a better influence on my teammates.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I can appreciate, drag it onto the mat, and you can take that same lesson and not just apply it on the mat, but apply it like at work or anywhere that something might be getting done.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not, like I thought about this from my occupation as well. We've got captains who are very good at teaching and directing their crew, but the crew also knows what the captain's job is. And if the captain's not really doing his job and he's not taking care of business, he can preach till he's blue in the face, but he won't have the respect that another captain might have, and his efforts to teach and train his crew will not be as effective.
Yeah, that's a great way to do things. I think it has it's similar or on the same page as our quote of the week here by Oliver Goldsmith. People seldom improve when they have no other model but themselves to copy. So I think that's a great quote. It talks about coaches, teachers, other people you look up to, like athletes. Having somebody to copy is a great tool for improvement, and I think that's a great tool for jiu-jitsu improvement as well. Like, if you want to develop a certain type of game, look for those who already play that game and model that after them. If it's a teammate or maybe somebody who you could do some research online and watch some videos of them training, or buy an instructional video that they have or something like that and model that after them, the improvement can be a lot quicker than if you're just kind of discovering this all for yourself. And because there's a lot of ups and downs and a lot of difficult things that you'll bump into if done that way.
I sit there and I think about that, Byron, and I think back in my own jiu-jitsu journey, and it also goes back to my own professional journey too. But, one thing I noticed about jiu-jitsu is when I first started, I was gung-ho right off the bat. And we could only train 2 days a week back then, and there was very little on the internet. But, after a couple of years, I think it might have went up to 3 days a week, and new people started. For like the first year Byron and I trained, we'd never had any new people start. Remember that, Byron? It was, just us. We didn't have anybody to practice our stuff on. And then a group of new people comes in, and I noticed like some of them really getting better quicker. And, it was a little hurtful to my ego right off the bat. I'm like, hey, these guys are getting better, and here I am. I feel like I'm not getting better, and what is it? And, when I took some time to start thinking about it, I wasn't really totally into jiu-jitsu at that time. I think I was a little down on jiu-jitsu. I didn't know if I was going to continue doing it. I wasn't as happy as I was when I first started. And I was just going through the motions, kind of like what you were talking there. And what I had to do is, I started watching the people who were learning, who were getting better, and they were working hard. They were asking questions. I was just showing up. There's a big difference between showing up. Kind of, goes back to Joe's quote where his grandson isn't showing up. His grandson's, diving into everything possible, trying to learn everything possible. And, I was just showing up, just paying my monthly dues and coming to class and, not really in on it. And once I started looking at what people were doing, why I was stagnating, it definitely helped me. And, I said that goes for the personal level too. You got to look at people at your job, that you admire, that are really good at it. What are they doing? And emulate that person.
That's a great example, Gary, of showing like kind of what it was like at the beginning versus now. I really think you could look at a classroom and tell who's learning the most just by watching them. Like, you could turn sound off and you could just watch a video feed and say, okay, these people are learning a lot, and not worry about belt levels or anything. Just, you could watch people and see who's learning. They're going to be the ones. We've all been there, and it happens, and it's perfectly fine if, know why you're there and know why you're training. If it's there just to have fun, that's fantastic. But if you're there and you really want to work on something today, and let's say Gary's teaching arm bars, are you doing as many reps and as perfectly as you can, and asking those questions like you're talking about to either your training partner or the coach or the people training next to you? Are you getting the most of it, or do you do it 3 times and then talk about where you're going to eat afterwards and that sort of thing? I'm not saying that like they're both okay. It depends what you want out of it. This is like a hobby for fun, or if you want to make this a little bit more seriously, or you want to get, maybe arm bars is your thing, maybe arm bars is not your thing. But it's fairly, I think you could watch a class and say, this person's learning a lot today, this person is kind of taking the day off. And this isn't a high school thing where coaches should be yelling at you. If you want to kind of take the day off and piddle around and relax, that's up to you. We're adults here. You're in charge of your own development largely in this. It's, Gary showed you the arm bar. Did you want to learn it? Did you want to get to the point where Gary is correcting you? Do you encourage that feedback from him? So, yeah, I think that, from that new person's perspective, if you team up with a new person and you kind of show them, yeah, we just do it 3 times and then you're good. Well, if it's terrible, help them out. Teach them that. If they understand that, tell them like a little bit deeper about the arm bar, and you're getting this really good, let's tighten up this part of your arm bar. It's a detail that we didn't really cover because I didn't think you'd get here today. I mean, there's so much you can learn, and that teaching behavior can also be rubbed off, and it could be contagious to somebody else.
Byron, I really liked what you said about we are all responsible for our own development. And that one really hit me perfect there. And that's what it is. I mean, everybody's got a different reason for doing this. I mean, I really like to have fun. I don't really want to do the crazy cardio and cut weight and stuff like that. I like to just have fun. But where I say I like to just have fun, I do want to get better. I do want to learn more stuff. And if I just come and I'm just there, as you said, talking about dinner and, just do 3 arm bars and then start talking about, what I'm going to do at night or what football game I'm going to watch. I'm wasting time, and I'm wasting the time of my training partner, and I'm wasting the time of my coach. It's, the hour I'm there with my goal to get better. It's all up to me. Your instructor can do everything for you, teach you everything, but unless I put in the time, put in quality time, it's not going to happen.
Yep, and I want to help you get that quality time, especially if you're in the first year of training, and get those habits in there correctly. I've got an audiobook called Your First Year of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There's a link to it in the show notes. That's $11.99. And if you are thinking about jiu-jitsu or you're within the first year still, there's a lot of good stuff in there that I want to help you out and get you off to the right track and make this whole thing easier and more enjoyable. Can you believe that it can? It sounds like I'm selling something that's not possible. You could both be better at jiu-jitsu and it could be easier. It doesn't always have to be harder because you're going to work smarter and you're not going to do things that are not productive to your development. So take the learning and your own development in your own hands and let old Coach Byron here help you out. There's a link in the show notes. It's $11.99. It's audiobook. It's about 2.5 hours long. Check it out, my friends. All right, let's get the main part of the show here, the interview with Katie Elliott. He is the most interesting grappler in the world.
He reached the top of Everest by sweeping it and taking Mount. This is also how the Mount position got its name. He had to drop his sponsorship with Beats headphones because they would not fit over his cauliflower ears. Their stock dropped 30% that day. He wore his unwashed gi to a blind date. You're damn right he got a second date.
I don't always listen to podcasts, but when I do, I prefer the BjjBrick Podcast. Stay sweaty, my friends.
All right, my friends, I'm happy to bring Katie Elliott to the BjjBrick Podcast. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Byron. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. Today we're going to be talking a lot about sports nutrition. I've got a lot to learn about, and I think we're lucky having somebody who's very knowledgeable on that with your base in being a performance athlete and being in like an endurance style of sport. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're up to.
Well, I'm a registered dietitian, and my specialty is sports nutrition. And I work a lot with athletes all over the country, a lot of triathletes, just because that's part of my background. And I've also started working with jiu-jitsu athletes because my husband is an active jiu-jitsu player. And so I'm really excited to work with the weight class sports in addition to, the endurance sports. So I own my own private practice. It's called Elliott Performance and Nutrition, and we're based out of Aspen, Colorado, but I have HIPAA-compliant video chat, which allows me to see athletes all over the country. So that's really great.
Help me out, what does that mean? Like a HIPAA-compliant training, is that something somebody could do online with you over the computer or over their phones?
Good question. I should have explained that. HIPAA is basically a privacy rule in medicine. And so when you say something's HIPAA compliant, it means that it's secure and people's medical information isn't going to get leaked in some way or hacked in some way. So when we do HIPAA compliant video chat, it means it's private. And so when my clients are talking to me, what they're talking about stays in the room unless they give me permission otherwise. So basically, when I'm working with an athlete, we can talk face to face over the computer. And so that's the beauty of video chat. And they can also get in touch with me via secure messaging, because even though it's unlikely for something to happen, email isn't secure. So I have a platform where people can keep what we're talking about confidential, which may or may not be important to them, but it's just an extra level of protection and value that I give my clients.
Katie, tell me a little bit about yourself as far as like sports have gone for you and what you're doing.
So I grew up as a tennis player, and I played Division I tennis at Davidson College. And then after college, I moved out to Aspen and realized how much I missed the structure of training, because I've basically been an athlete since I was 4 years old and in a strict training program. So I got into triathlon and had some early success. I've represented Team USA at the amateur level 8 times in different countries, and basically just fell in love with triathlon. It's a great sport, great people, really down to earth community. So I've had, while I was in graduate school, I had to take a couple of years off with injuries and also just the process of becoming a dietitian. So this past year, I've been really trying to get back into it and kind of stage a comeback for myself. So I've competed all over the country, in Florida, in Ohio. I did age group nationals, which is an amateur triathlon race. And so I got a spot to go to the world championship next year. So training pretty hard for the Olympic distance, probably will do some 70.3 races next year. And I'm just really enjoying myself, being an athlete, being competitive.
So just to help everybody out here, Olympic distance, we don't even know what that means on this podcast. So maybe even this. So triathlon, swim, bike, and run. Definitely, I mean, the people who are doing well at this are you considered like to be the top endurance athletes in the world. So what is Olympic distance, and tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Olympic distance is the race that they actually have in the Olympics. And it's a 1,500 meter swim, a 25-mile bike, and a 10K run. And so it's considered short distance triathlon. And basically it's just you're redlining for 2 hours and change. So that's a little bit different from the longer distance triathlons that a lot of people know, like the Ironman. So in the Ironman, you're doing a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike, and a marathon. So that's done in a little bit lower heart rate zone. You're not throttling yourself for the whole time like you are in Olympic distance. So that's kind of the difference between the two. It's almost if you were to think of a miler versus a marathoner.
Okay, but it's not easier or harder, I would say, to do one. I don't have any knowledge from this, but it's just a different pace. And maybe somebody's body's built for one or the other. But like you said, at the shorter distances, you're pushing really hard all the time. There's less of a fall into at this pace, and it's not super uncomfortable. You said redlining, I think is the word you use. Like you're constantly pushing because it's not long enough to kick in at the slower distances. Is that an accurate way to describe it?
That is an accurate way to describe it. A lot of times we'll see the younger athletes in kind of the Olympic distance races and what we call the International Triathlon Union races, because those athletes have more ability to go fast in their early 20s and teens and things like that. And then as athletes get a little bit older, they often will switch to the longer distance racing because, when you're 35 and upwards, or even 30 and upwards, your body becomes a little bit better able to handle longer distance racing. Endurance, kind of in that sense becomes a little bit more of an advantage.
I never knew that. That's an interesting thing. And as we get older and are doing jiu-jitsu, I don't think of the, being on the mat for us a long time as a disadvantage. If you're out there training and rolling for an hour or two, like maybe you'll be able to find some sort of rhythm and be able to get into that opposed to short, fast matches. Yeah,
definitely. I could see how that could translate. I mean, it's definitely an interesting thing. The reason I'm doing Olympic distance is because I've had a lot of injuries, and I also really like the distance, to be honest, but my body at this point hasn't been able to handle the half marathon run because I've had an ankle injury. And so that's sort of why I've chosen that distance at this point. But a lot of my friends, I'm 38, and so a lot of my friends who are 35 and older are definitely gravitating more toward kind of that long distance Ironman, half Ironman triathlon.
That's interesting. Katie, you wrote an article. It's on your blog. We'll put a link to it. The website is eliteperformanceandnutrition.com. But the article was called How to Fuel for a Jiu-Jitsu Tournament. And it's got a lot of great details. I recommend everybody go check it out. But I think that would be a great thing to talk about. And it's one thing, sure, you're competing. This is a dead-on article. But we all want to fuel ourselves to perform well, whether we're training or competing. So I think that, like a lot of these, as I'm reading it, I should think about it. I'm going to go train today. Sometimes I go to train, Katie, and I just perform poorly. And it might be part of a mental lapse, or I might not be focused, or it might be I didn't eat well the day before. I definitely didn't eat well, the 4 hours beforehand. So I think this is a valuable topic to talk about with anybody, whether you're competing or you're just training. So kind of introduce us to some of the ideas behind this article.
So the idea behind this article was that nutrition can really be a weapon for you, or it can be something that is really detrimental to your performance. So what we wanted to do in chatting about competition nutrition is to really give people insight about what they should be doing in different situations. So for jiu-jitsu athletes, there are a lot of different situations that come into a competition day. You have pre-weigh-in, you have the few days before weigh-in, you have the time right after you weigh in, kind of the time throughout the day when you're competing in matches. And then you have the recovery element. So all of those different scenarios require a little bit of a different approach in order to be successful. So the idea behind the article was just to shed some light on how to approach those different complex situations so that you could perform, or athletes could perform at their best.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I mean, if you are trying to make a weight, and a lot of times in wrestling or in MMA, you'll weigh in the day before. Many times in jiu-jitsu, you weigh in and then you go compete. And you're still in that point where I don't want to weigh 170 pounds. I want to weigh 165 pounds or so, make a little adjustment, and how I don't want to perform terribly because I've cut a few pounds, but and how to do that I think is an interesting thing, and also not. So we suffer, I think, from two different things, probably more than that. But hydration loss when you try to cut weight, but also you have to be cognizant of having the right nutrition in your body, because the article touched on, you need to have certain types of carbohydrates and stuff like that in your system to burn. Otherwise, you kind of just run out.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Especially the weigh-in sort of scenario and game is complicated, because you're right. A lot of times athletes do want to cut a few pounds, but you don't want to take it too far, because if you do that via dehydration or, fasting or other techniques, you're going to hurt your performance.
Katie, you mentioned fasting. I am interested in that as a tool, maybe just for healthy living, or maybe is it something that somebody should or should not do as a competition approaches? What are your thoughts on like intermittent fasting, like a 24-hour fast?
So in terms of intermittent fasting, there's a lot of research behind it, and also a lot of people talking about it right now. I think when you're talking about athletes, you have to consider their training schedule and what they need to perform. So basically, if you're rolling 2 hours a day and you potentially have a strength training session in the afternoon, or even if you're just rolling once a day, intermittent fasting can be a little bit difficult, because when you're actually training, you need fuel, you need food to fuel that training session. And if you don't have that fuel, you're not going to get as much as you would out of your training session if you were fueled. So basically, it can be a difficult and challenging thing to do fasting from that standpoint. If you're doing it for health, like everyday healthy living, it's not something where they do a complete 24-hour fast. I don't think. I think it's sort of like their periods in the day where you're supposed to be fasting. Since I work with athletes primarily, I don't use it a lot, just because it makes it really difficult for them to kind of get what they need to perform and to train. So in terms of jiu-jitsu and weigh-ins, fasting is something that can make sense if your weigh-in is the day before your match. I don't think you want to take it to the extreme. I don't think you want to fast for 3, 4, 5 days, because you're going to be so depleted by the time you go to your tournament that it's not going to be worth it. But if your weigh-in is the day before your match, it might make sense, because you have a decent window to refuel and replenish. You have some time to get some carbohydrates and to replace your carbohydrate stores, which are your main source of energy for quick twitch, kind of fast, explosive movement like you do in jiu-jitsu. Now, if you're talking about the day of a tournament, let's say you're weighing in 15 to 30 minutes prior to your match. In that case, I would not recommend fasting. I would recommend having breakfast early that morning, sort of a simple breakfast, maybe a couple of slices of white toast with peanut butter, and then weigh in a few hours later and then replenish after that. But you don't want to have kind of like, a whole fast from the night before. So you would go to bed at, say, 9, get up at 8. So you haven't had food for a while then, and then continue to fast for another 4 hours, weigh in, and then compete. It's just going to hurt your performance. So I would say if you weigh in the day of, you want to eat something early in the morning, have a couple of hours, weigh in, and then replenish after, rather than fasting for, 15 hours before you compete.
Yeah. That makes sense that way. It could be used. And I would say, don't experiment with this idea the first time, the day, like that week of competition. Like, do kind of a mock competition, as far as not like competing at your own school or anything, but just say, this is competition week, although it's not, it's 2 months away, but today I'm going to eat like I'm going to try to eat the day before and the day of the tournament, and to see how I do. And that way, if you do decide to have to cut back some food in order to get the right weight, you've experimented with that. You know what foods work for you. You might try the toast with peanut butter one week. You might try something else, a couple apples and peanut butter. I don't know. The next week, and see which one works for you, because we're all a little bit different. But it's nice to know that this is my system. I've done this 3 weeks now and it's worked great. Or, for more seasoned athletes, this is what I always do before I compete. And it's one less thing to stress about is your diet and what's going to get you to perform well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. One of my big mottos is nothing new on tournament day and really in the week before the tournament. So you definitely want to do some trial runs, just like Byron was saying, and even keep track of those trial runs. There's a new app called Marune that is a training log, and they have a notes section. So one way you could keep track of your different trial runs about weigh-ins is, to just put notes in there and say, okay, well, I ate this 3 hours before I weighed in and I was able to make weight. And that way you've kind of got a running tally of how things are working and how different foods are sitting and things that are going to be important on competition day.
Yeah. You mentioned Marune, a great app to train with. It's a nice thing. It's got like a little toggle switch, gi or no gi. You put in the day, you put in how many hours you've trained, how many hours you've rolled, location in case you're training at different spots. That's kind of a neat thing to log as well. Keep track of your food. Those are all great things. And like anything, if you have a goal, I think it helps a ton to have trackable things that you could measure. And if you're looking like, okay, my goal is to do really well at this tournament, and you're tracking your progress, you're tracking your training, and you're training less, or you're noticing some trends that aren't good, it's so much easier to catch those than like with the science behind it, with being your own coach as far as keeping that stuff all tracked and down. Like, we're not in jiu-jitsu, we don't all have performance coaches and that sort of thing, but so a lot of it falls on us. Do you want to track your intake of food? Do you want to track how many hours a week you're training? Do you want to track what types of things you're training, or what things, or if it's all no-gi or whatever? It's the app has been helpful to me for that. I think it's a valuable tool, and it's really where we're going in the future. I have two apps on my phone for fitness. One of them is a running app, which I hate it. I use it, but it's so frustrating. So let's just say I'm going to go on a 3-mile run. I have to open the app. It has to take a while to load. And then right when I click start, an ad pops up, and I have clicked the ad, and I have to get my phone out of this little pouch I have it in when I run. It's almost like a practical joke.
Yeah.
But the Marune app is nice. If you're a little bit more on it than me, you take a picture of your training. I think that's really cool, and have it as part of your log. There's a lot of interesting things that are being done with this app, and I think it's a great tool, and I think it's gonna help people train smarter.
Agreed. And I think, like, let's say you had a really great season in 2018, and in 2020 you're like, what did I do to really win those tournaments and to get on those podiums? And you can go back and you can actually look at your training and say, okay, this is what I did. Maybe I should get back to this sort of training that was so helpful during that time period.
Yeah. And I've been on here for a little while in the app, but there's a social side to it as well. And I go down there and find me. You can either type in BjjBrick or type in my name, Byron Jabbar, and add me. If you're a listener to the show, I'd be happy to have you on there as like a part of the social network that is in the Marune app. I think that's cool.
Yeah, I will definitely add you.
Thank you.
Today.
But any listener who downloads this, it's I'll put a link to the app as well. It's Android or iOS. Both of them are up and running, and I don't think it matters. I'm on Android. I think it doesn't matter versus what platform you're on. If you have the app, you could probably be friends with anybody, right?
I think so, because I'm on Apple.
Okay, we'll figure this out today.
Yeah, I know. I'll just add you right now. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that they go back and forth, and you can be friends on people regardless of the platform. In fact, I'm almost positive. So
yeah, that's cool. And it's just to me, it just talks about if a good goal, part of that is it needs to be measurable. Like, your progress needs to be measurable. And part of measuring that is keeping a log or a training journal. And it's fine if you want to write it down on pen and paper, that works fine. But we have such great tools in our phones, why not use it? And I think it's a fantastic tool that's helping me keep track of my training sessions.
Yeah, and I think it's great to have just the encouragement from friends and people as you're training, because most of us have a job and other things in our lives, and it's sometimes hard to stay motivated. And when you've got somebody saying, "Oh, sir," giving you a thumbs up, that can be really helpful in terms of motivation. And it can also be really helpful just to see what other people are doing.
Cool.
Say, it's Christmas and Byron's training. Maybe I should go get myself to the gym too.
Yeah. And I'm not big on, I don't post when I train on like Facebook or anything like that. Some people do, and that's great. But I am big on like logging my training. That's really neat. And so kind of that social network that where my family and my coworkers aren't seeing, hey, my post about jiu-jitsu, the people that are in that jiu-jitsu circle will see it. And that's kind of a neat way to be social about your training.
Definitely.
Cool. We got a little bit, I got sidetracked a little bit. I do want to talk about, let's just say, nutrition for the day of normal training. Katie, let's say I train at 6 o'clock in the evening. What would be a good plan for, I guess, breakfast, lunch? When is dinner? Do I eat beforehand? Do I eat after? Kind of walk me through an ideal performance. And this is kind of aimed at, I want to do well at training. I want to have one of those days where I go in, I feel good, I do great on the mat, opposed to one of the days I go in and I have fun, but my performance is lacking. So walk me through like a good day of nutrition for getting a performance. Let's just put in the evening.
Okay, that's a great question. And this brings me to a principle that I think is really important. So as you get close to the window of training, so yours is 6 o'clock, you're as you get closer to 6 o'clock, you want to be eating more simple, more easily digestible foods, because as we all know, if you eat a bunch of nachos an hour before you're rolling, that's probably not going to go so well. So in the 4 hours leading up to your training session, you want to think about getting some good hydration in there so that you don't show up to your practice dehydrated. And you also want to think about getting some carbohydrates in there, because carbohydrates are really the main fuel that your body uses for really intense exercise. So I would say, depending on your schedule, if you can have a snack, 4 hours in advance, that snack may be a little bit more complex. It may be, a slice of whole grain bread with, some nut butter and a banana. So as we get closer to training, you want your snack or your mini meal to be smaller and simpler. And so if you've got something that's got a lot of fat, a lot of protein, is kind of a mixed meal, that's going to be a lot for your body to digest, especially if it's a lot of fat and fiber. So if you're having salad close to when you're rolling, or if you're having something that's high in fat like guacamole close to when you're rolling, basically those foods are slower to digest. Fat and fiber are slower to digest. So if those are sitting in your gut, then, that's going to cause problems, because as you're moving and as you're exercising, your muscles really need the blood to be shunted there rather than having that blood sit in your stomach and try to digest the things that are slower to digest. So I would say if you're 30 minutes right before you're about to practice, you could have, a fig Newton or, a couple of pretzels, but basically it needs to be easy to digest. So you're not having something complex that has all the different food groups. You're having something that's basically simple carbohydrate. Okay.
So kind of avoiding like the bunch of protein or a bunch of fat. Would like the protein shakes, are those easy to digest, or are those best done longer before you train or after you're training?
Well, protein shakes are easier to digest. Liquid foods are always a little bit easier to digest. So it's something where theoretically you could do it right before you roll, but the things that the body really needs during a rolling session is really, the carbohydrate.
Okay.
You've got plenty of fat stores in your body, so you don't really have to think about that, but carbohydrate stores are limited. Now there's some research about, does protein before exercise help with, muscle adaptations and rebuilding muscle? And there's not a body of conclusive evidence that tells us yes, we need to be doing that. So I recommend that people fuel with carbohydrates before, and then after they're done, they think about sort of getting in that protein shake or the things that are going to help your muscles to rebuild. So basically that's, protein, that's protein's job, is to help muscles rebuild.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's just say lunch. I mean, what would be a good lunch for me if I'm going to roll 6 hours later?
So a lot of this depends on your individual tolerance, but I would think with 6 hours between lunch and when you're rolling, you could really focus then on nutrient density and getting, some good fiber and whole grains and lean protein and the things that are healthy and that we want to kind of emphasize in the diet for recovery and immune health and all of those things. So, what do you usually eat for lunch, Byron?
It's all over the place. On a good day, I'll eat a salad. On a bad day, I'll eat a cheeseburger, but I'm all over the place. Sometimes I skip lunch if I'm not very hungry. But I do think there's value in kind of experiment a little bit and eat a chicken breast and see how it perform later and see if that, but something like that, something with more protein or more density would be better at lunch than it would be before training. So it's okay to eat like a meat, like a chicken or something like that with some vegetables. That'd be a lunch would be a good time for that.
Yeah, I mean, let's say you're doing your salad, you could do some spinach, some quinoa, potentially some nuts and some lean protein and, some good vinaigrette dressing. And I think you would be fine. And the beauty of eating something like that is, vegetables have a lot of nutrients in them, and so does lean protein, and so do nuts. And so what you're doing there is you're emphasizing nutrition for health as well as performance, because we know that the vitamins and the minerals that are in foods, those are the things that help your body do, perform different processes. And it also is really helpful in terms of recovery. They've done some studies about spinach and how people who ate spinach recovered a little bit better. And so basically what I like to think of is, if you're far away from your training session, you really want to emphasize that nutrient density in those foods that are going to help you health-wise and performance-wise. Yeah. And then when you get closer to your training session, you're going to emphasize things that are both easy on your gut and also give you the carbohydrates and the fuels that you need to perform. So those things aren't necessarily your health foods. They're kind of like your sports nutrition performance foods. And then you emphasize your health foods that have more fiber and things that are really good for your, for immunity, things like that, when you have a little bit more time in, to recover from that meal and to, to go before you start training. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That makes sense. I think the thing for me, I don't have the best diet in the world. I'm not a serious competitor, but kind of a cheat is the days I train, I do eat better because I know that it affects how I'm going to do. And so if I'm going to have lunch and I know I'm going to train in 6 or 7 hours, I think about that, and it helps me make better decisions because lunch isn't just experience that lasts about an hour and, with somebody, it's going to affect how I perform later on that night. And so even if you're like me and sometimes you have problems with eating healthy food, you should at least be eating healthy food on the days you train because it will help you perform better. If you enjoy performing better on the mats, and who doesn't do that?
Right. I know it's always fun to do well when you're rolling. And I think you make a really good point about, making sure that the days that you're training, that you're eating, foods that are additive to that. So if that makes you eat one less cheeseburger because a cheeseburger is going to make you feel kind of heavier, then that's great.
Yeah. So let's keep rewinding, I guess, in time and what would be a good breakfast? What do you recommend?
So, breakfast is the start of your day, and there's a lot of really good options there. An omelet with one yolk and some egg whites and a bunch of veggies, and a piece of whole grain toast, I think is a great breakfast. You could also do some overnight oats with, plain oatmeal, some flaxseed, some nuts, potentially a little bit of, whey protein or protein powder, and some water or milk. and then some berries, which have great antioxidants. That's a great breakfast as well, and that's one of my favorites. Or whole grain toast with peanut butter and banana is also a good go-to. And then obviously when you're having breakfast, you want to have some fluid with your breakfast in addition to your coffee if you drink coffee or tea.
Yeah. But it's not a big glass of orange juice.
Yeah, juice is an interesting topic. Orange juice is one of those things where you don't get the fiber from the orange, but you do get the sugar from the orange. So fruit is really healthy because it has fiber and it has some good vitamins and minerals, but it also has sugar. So when you take that fiber out by making it a juice, it becomes a little bit less beneficial than if you were to have an orange. And it can also just be a source of added calories without a lot of bang for your buck. So I don't love the whole concept of juice. I'd rather people eat like a piece of fruit. But, sometimes people really enjoy juice. And so if they really, really enjoy it, I'd say just a small amount.
Yeah, that makes sense. Juice is, and I could definitely be wrong, but juice is kind of like sugar water that it oftentimes pretends to be healthy. And you have to be careful with that sort of thing. So that kind of brings us through like a day of nutrition for just normal training. So what are the differences with a day of nutrition for competition?
So there actually is a pretty big difference with a competition day. You're really eating more of those foods that are meant for sport and less of sort of what we always think of as health foods like salads and nuts and avocado and fruits and vegetables, things like that. Because on competition day, you're solely focused on fueling your body to compete. So when let's just talk about, leading up to weigh-ins, you're really limiting fiber, things that are in fruits and vegetables, because those hang out in your stomach longer and can cause you to weigh more come weigh-in. You're cutting out things like whole grains potentially, which are normally really helpful and things that you should emphasize. But, right before you weigh in, those things aren't helpful because, again, they may affect your weight and may make you weigh a little bit more. So, that's one thing that's a little bit different. And then you sort of play with things like sports nutrition products on competition day. So before a weigh-in, you don't really want to be drinking sports drink because sports drinks have sodium and electrolytes, and those also can make you retain water. So, you're kind of limiting that then. But then after you're done weighing in, you want those sports beverages because they do contain electrolytes, and electrolytes help you to absorb fluid better. So you are incorporating sports drinks kind of right after weigh-in.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different sports drinks. Are they all equal, or is it just like a marketing competition to get my dollars? Like what do you recommend as far as sports drinks go?
So in terms of sports drink, there's a couple of caveats. With sports drink, you need to realize that it serves a very specific purpose. It's meant for people who are exercising at moderate to high intensity for more than an hour or an hour and a half. So sports drinks aren't what you're drinking when you're sitting at the office, because that's basically just salt and sugar. But when you're competing, it definitely does serve a purpose. So you just have to keep in mind those windows of time. In terms of competition, that's even a little bit of a different story. I would say, a competition day is a day to have sports drink because sports drink helps you to absorb fluids more efficiently. And it also helps to increase blood plasma volume, which makes it easier for your cardiovascular system to pump blood to your muscles. So in terms of different sports drinks, there are definitely differences in sports drinks. So you'll find things like Noon or Propel or Powerade Zero. Those things aren't giving you carbohydrates and thus energy. They're basically just providing electrolytes. So as you move up and you have something like Gatorade, that contains both glucose, possibly other forms of carbohydrate, and electrolytes. And so what that does is it provides energy. And the combination of glucose and sodium also helps, the carbohydrate as well as the sodium to be absorbed a little bit better. And then you go on to a whole other class of sports drinks. Like you have things that are what's called preload formulas that are high in sodium. So those are things like Osmo Preload or Hyperhydration Scratch. And those basically are meant to, load an athlete with a lot of sodium at one point or at one time. I think Pedialyte is similar to that as well. So, and then I guess the last part is just that different sports drinks contain different amounts of sodium. So if you're looking at regular Gatorade, I think that's maybe 350 milligrams of sodium per serving. When you're looking at something like Gatorade Endurance, that's 600 milligrams of sodium per serving. So they have some variations. And then there's also brands that are trying to be a little bit more, pure in terms of their ingredients. So, Scratch is made with minimal ingredients. You see less things on the label, whereas in regular Gatorade, you might see something like red dye. So depending on your preference or what you're looking for, there's a lot of variability in sports drinks.
So I'm kind of realizing in my own system of training, something that happens to me, and maybe hydration is part of that. I typically train about an hour and a half or so, in 30 minutes of that's rolling, and an hour of it is warming up and some technique portion. And I do great with a liter of cold water sitting next to the mat, and I go and I sip it occasionally. But if I happen to do like an open mat where I'm training hard for the hour and a half, or it goes past the 2 hour mark and it gets closer to 3, I usually end up getting, I may not notice it necessarily right then, but I don't feel as good the rest of the day. I'm like, man, I overdid it at jiu-jitsu. And maybe it's because I'm not drinking the right thing. I'm not replenishing like I usually do, because usually I'm just replenishing water. Maybe I should be switching to a sports drink at that point in time.
Yeah, I would say if you're rolling, especially for 3 hours, 2.5, 3 hours, adding a sports drink is just going to enhance performance. Like for me, in my sport, if I do a workout that lasts 2 hours and it's a high intensity sport workout and I've added sports drink, I find that I can accomplish goals that I can't accomplish if I'm just drinking water, because basically, you're starting to deplete carbohydrate stores and you're starting to deplete sodium with sweat. And so it actually can be quite beneficial. And then I would say to that, one of the things, hydration is important, obviously, and lack of hydration can result in, diminished performance. So one really cool tool is you can weigh before you work out and then you can weigh afterwards. And for every pound you lose, you want to replace 16 to 24 ounces of fluid, preferably alongside a meal.
Okay, that makes sense. Katie, I think an interesting thing would be to just kind of run through your routine of what you do during a race. I mean, it's different than jiu-jitsu, but I think it's just fascinating to learn about other sports and things like that. You start with the swim. Are you intaking some carbs before you go and swim, or are you kind of just running off of the breakfast that you had earlier? Or tell me about pre-swim and post-swim.
Sure, I will definitely tell you my routine, and then I'll kind of try to relate it to jiu-jitsu.
Okay.
So I wake up 3.5 hours before I'm set to compete, because I need at least 3 hours to digest food. So, if I have a 7 a.m. start, then I'll wake up at 3:30. I'll finish eating by 4. And I usually have something that's very easy to digest carbohydrates. So it'll be like a plain bagel, some peanut butter, a banana, and then some sports drink. So that's basically allowing my body to get in carbohydrates that I'm going to use. Basically, I'm topping off my carbohydrate stores or glycogen stores.
Katie, let me interrupt you real quick here, because most jiu-jitsu stuff, we're lucky it doesn't start at 7 o'clock in the morning. So you're waking up super early. How sleep-wise, what time are you going to bed to get up that early?
I go to bed probably around 9.
Okay.
But I also realize that if I don't get as much sleep as I would like right before a tournament because of nerves or things like that, it's not going to ruin my day.
Okay. I didn't know how. We're talking a lot about nutrition, but sleep affects a lot of people differently, and I'm just curious about that. So you get up real early, and then sorry for interrupting you.
No worries at all. And I think it's, you make a good point just in talking about sleep. Like if you're going to a tournament and you don't sleep great the night before a tournament because you're nervous, it's not necessarily going to ruin your day. And so I take comfort in knowing that. Yeah,
it's nerve-wracking to be, up at midnight. Okay, I'm not getting a good night. I'm having a tough time. Up at 2 a.m. Like, I'm not going to sleep at all. And then that stress of not sleeping keeps you up the rest of the night.
Totally.
There's no, if you're lacking a little bit of sleep, likelihood that's not going to be a huge deal on your ability to compete.
No, and I think so. If we're moving forward, kind of with the day, we've done like that bagel and peanut butter breakfast. Got a good 3 hours before the competition starts. I drink to thirst at that point. You don't want to overload your body with water. You want to stay hydrated, but you don't want to overdo it, because if you're overdoing it, you're going to have to pee or whatever, consistently right up to your match, which can also be really unnerving. So I know that I'm hydrated from the day before. I know that I'm hydrated from what I've had that morning. And so I kind of just drink as I feel like drinking throughout the morning. So in your case, in jiu-jitsu, if you're weighing in that morning, you would not drink sports drink. You drink water because, sports drink has sodium and that's going to hold water. So after I've had sort of that 3 hours to digest food, I'll start the swim. Let's say it's at 7. I might potentially have something like a few Cliff shot blocks or honey stinger chews 30 minutes before I start, just to give me a little bit more easily accessible carbohydrate and energy. So I start the swim, go through that. You aren't going to eat anything on the swim. You're not having a lunch pail with you.
Things aren't going well if you're taking an eat break on the swim.
They really are. You are not performing at your ability. So,
or if you're drinking a bunch of water as you go, so that's also not part of the plan.
Yeah, especially
that lake water.
Lakes that we swim in. So yeah, you get through the swim and then you get onto the bike and you start fueling with sports drink. No matter the length of the race, I definitely will take in sports drink on the bike because I want to hydrate, as efficiently as possible. So my bike usually takes about an hour. And so I'll generally have sports drink and I'll take in a gel or some shot blocks probably at the 15-minute mark. I give myself a little bit of time to settle in and grab that. And then I also will take, another gel or some more shot blocks in 30 minutes after. So basically what that's doing is it's providing easily accessible carbohydrate when I'm working really hard. And it's also kind of stabilizing blood sugar because I'm feeding every 30 minutes. Generally, if it's a short race, I will also add caffeine because that can be an ergogenic aid, and it's especially helpful, I feel like, in my case.
Okay.
So, the other part of it is I have a really high sweat rate, meaning I sweat a lot more than normal people do.
Okay.
So I'm probably drinking a bottle and a half. So almost like 124-ounce bottle and then, half of that again. To get through the bike, just because I lose a lot of sweat. So that's sort of something that I've figured out and something that, I know to do.
Okay.
And then I get off and on the run. I take in one last gel around the 2 mile mark. And that's pretty much it. Other than, I guess that's not quite it. On the run, I also will they have aid stations every mile. So I'll take in whatever they have on course. Usually it's Gatorade Endurance. So I'll drink, one of those little cups that they give out at aid stations that are about 4 ounces. I'll take that in.
I don't know how to get most of that liquid into my mouth while I'm trying to jog. I just splash it all over.
I can tell you how to do it. So basically you hold the cup and you make it into like an hourglass.
Okay.
In the middle, and then while you're running, you take in the fluids.
I remember typically it's just funny. Like I'm not running competitively. Like if I do a 5K, I'm just out there having, it's like usually a charity event and I'm running it with my wife. But usually I just ended up like hitting most of it on my face or like on my shirt. Like, well, I didn't drink much of that. And then we just go on. I mean, I don't usually drink water while I do my, like a morning jog anyway, but it's just kind of like, man, I can't get that to work. So you kind of pinch the cup in the middle and fold it. That makes a lot of sense. Technique.
Yeah. Technique. And so I guess like if we're talking about jiu-jitsu, drinking sports drink periodically throughout the day is a good idea just because you want to stay hydrated. And one of the tricks that we've been taught over the years is to monitor your urine color and just to kind of gauge whether you're hydrated, because hydration is obviously important to performance. So, one of the things that you want to look at is, is your urine clear? Is it sort of like lemonade, or is it sort of dark like apple juice? So if it's clear, you're drinking a lot and you're probably pretty well hydrated and you can kind of ease up for the most part. If you're kind of at a pale lemonade color, you're doing well. And if your urine's really dark, that's a signal that you probably need to, get some more fluid in you. So that's kind of an easy thing that I do throughout the tournament day. And then if you're at a tournament, you all have scales because most people are bringing them to make sure that they're making weight. So one good thing is to kind of, know where you really sit versus where you are when you've cut weight, and to weigh and to just say, okay, things are looking a little bit better in terms of my hydration status. I'm around 130 pounds, which is where I usually cruise, rather than, 128, which is where I want to be when I'm cutting weight.
Okay, that makes sense. I didn't think about kind of doing that checkup like weight-wise and seeing. I just think, drink something and get rehydrated, but kind of just check on that and measure it. Yet again, like you're talking about the Marune app, a way to measure things is important. Yeah. So let's say the term is going well and I compete, I actually win, I go out again, I compete again, I win again. So you have potential to be doing, several rounds of competing. That's kind of like as you're like replenishing your system, you're on the bike or you're running, same thing. Like that's when I'd be doing the sports drink or something like that, right?
Yeah, I think so. Especially, let's say your matches are really close together. Like, you get done with one match that you've won and you have about 45 minutes. You might have something like a half of a bar or something really simple like chews or a gel 30 minutes before your next match, because basically you're just providing some readily accessible carbohydrates to fuel that next, tournament round.
Yeah.
And then some sports drink, of course, to stay hydrated.
Yeah, that makes sense. And sometimes the matches are, Katie, you and I have a match and you beat me, and then somebody else has a match, and that match that somebody else is having is your break, and then you get to go after that match. Like sometimes they're pretty quick. But that's the time you would be doing that, the sports, same thing, sports drink, maybe even caffeine would be a helpful thing at that point in time. It's an interesting thing, but it all comes down to being able to practice with this stuff and see how you do.
Exactly. That's the most important thing is, you really want to practice and do some trial runs before you actually get out there. Because if you, let's say, I eat a Fig Newton because that's what Byron does, but my stomach doesn't really react very well to Fig Newtons. I would like to know that before a tournament day where it's really kind of, the culmination of all my hard work. So again, nothing new on tournament day. You need to be practicing that well in advance.
Hey, Katie, I just would ask you, if I see you eating a Fig Newton, I say, hey, you're eating a cookie before you train, what would you say?
I would say, that makes sense in that window of nutrition, because basically, a cookie is easily accessible carbohydrate.
Okay. When their old commercial, like, it's not a cookie, it's fruit and cake. Isn't that the old commercial?
That is absolutely the old commercial. Yeah, but that's one of the weird parts about sports nutrition is it's definitely not necessarily health nutrition. It's easily accessible carbohydrate. Like sports nutrition and sports drinks, those aren't really health foods. They just serve a purpose for sports performance. And
Yeah, and you talk about that in the article as far as there's a difference, and they both could be healthy, but between sports nutrition and health nutrition, definitely some differences there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are definitely differences. Again, sports nutrition products serve a purpose, and they do help you to compete better. And they are things that we have research on, and we do know that sports drinks help. But again, a sports drink isn't meant for a kid, or an office worker to have at lunch. It's meant for somebody who's performing, who needs the carbohydrate that's easily accessible and who needs the electrolytes. And the gels that you're taking in, those are basically they're sugar. And they may have some caffeine. So that's not a snack that you give your kids when they go to play soccer for 30 minutes with their friends. It's something that serves a very specific purpose in a scenario like a jiu-jitsu tournament where you need readily available carbohydrate right before you go on and you compete.
Cool. So let's just say I'm training and I do a pretty good job with my diet, and I get hurt. It looks like I'm going to be out for 2 weeks. Then I would need to switch to maybe the healthy nutrition versus the athlete's nutrition. Not that athlete's isn't healthy, but the lifestyle of just like, I guess, an ordinary person who doesn't work out as much. I need to cut out some of that stuff that would probably act badly if I'm not actually going to burn it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Basically, when we see somebody who's injured, one of the things that we want to do is just talk to them about, meeting their kind of new paradigm for energy needs. Because if you're not rolling 2 hours a day, you're not necessarily burning as many calories. And your carbohydrate needs go down a little bit as you're working out less. Basically, carbohydrates, you need a little bit more carbohydrates when you're doing more extensive training. Okay. And you need a little bit less. Like in the off season, you don't need quite as many carbohydrates. And so that's one thing to consider. And then there are different foods that can really make a difference when you're trying to heal. For example, if you've had surgery and there's a wound, vitamin C can help, the skin heal a little bit better. So those are sort of things to keep into consideration or to take into consideration when you're injured.
Cool. Katie, we've talked about a lot of things. Are there any things that people often will think is a good idea that is bad, like something to avoid? I don't know. The juices thing kind of pops in, and you have that in your article. Like juices, they kind of sneaky. I'm going to have this big old thing of apple juice, and actually it's just a bunch of sugar without the fiber or whatever that they have. But are there any other things that people will do sometimes that they think are good that probably are actually bad?
Yeah, I would say, especially with weigh-ins, when people try to lose too much weight through dehydration, that's a really bad idea, because if you're severely dehydrating your body, it's going to take 24 to 48 hours to really replete and get you to the point where you're going to perform at your best. So I think people really need to be reasonable about what they plan to lose on weigh-in day. And you don't want to lose more than 5% of your body weight on a weigh-in day. So that means that you need to really kind of consider your weight loss strategy throughout the year and not have it be sort of like a really quick, oh no, sort of situation where you've got to, dehydrate or do something like that. Other things that are notoriously bad ideas are using things like diuretics and laxatives. In fact, they're on WADA's banned list and they're really unhealthy. So you don't want to do that. Some other things you want to avoid is caffeine in excessive amounts. So a Monster drink 4 times during your tournament day is probably not the best idea. And if you are using caffeine, you need to test it out prior, because caffeine can cause jitteriness, and it can also cause you to have to go to the bathroom because it's a diuretic. So again, that's something where you want to practice it and not overdo it. So another thing that isn't a great idea that I'll see people do is try to lose weight right before a tournament when their training is increased and when they're really trying to gain fitness in the month or two before that tournament. what you really want to do is try to lose weight in a down part of your season when you're not stressing your body as much and when you're not looking to gain as much fitness as you would kind of right before a tournament. So you want to really be strategic about that and about the period when you want to lose weight and when you plan to lose weight.
Yeah, it sounds like you got to really treating this food as like a fuel source. You don't want to cut the fuel off while you're trying to run at a high speed. That down season or that time where you're not planning on competing or doing anything too crazy is a good time to try to lose that. And from what I've learned, it seems like a lot of the weight loss is diet based. I mean, you could train really hard, but if you're eating unhealthy foods or foods that cause you to gain or maintain the weight you're at, you've got to cut those eventually.
Yeah, I agree. And it's basically one of those things where if you look at your diet, you don't want to take something that's really nutrient dense and providing a lot of benefit to your performance and training. You want to take something out that's less beneficial, like alcohol or sweets or things that your body doesn't really need as much. So that's the strategy that I often take. And then just one more word on weight loss.
Okay.
A lot of people try to lose weight too quickly. And so you really don't want to do that, because what happens if you're losing a substantial amount of weight per week is that your body goes into kind of starvation mode, and it will try to reduce your metabolic rate. And how many calories you burn at rest, because it thinks it's starving. So if you're an athlete and you're trying to lose weight, you want to lose weight gradually in a way that's sustainable so that you actually keep the weight off versus, losing a ton of weight at one time and slowing your metabolism then down and potentially gaining that weight all back.
Is that based on kind of individual things, or let's say I weigh 200 pounds and I want to get down to 150? Do I need to what would be a decent weekly or monthly loss that wouldn't be too crazy?
I would say I wouldn't recommend losing more than 1 to 2 pounds a week.
Okay.
It's because you don't want to slow the metabolism down. And if you're an active athlete that's, heavily training and you're working towards your competition season, less is more, like half pound to a pound a week, and doing things really gradually is sort of a better way to do it, because that way you're not taking calories away that you need to perform, and you're also not slowing your metabolism down. So I'd say the slower the better. And if you're going to lose weight, remove things that your body doesn't need, like alcohol, sweets, kind of non-nutritive things, rather than removing sources of good, high quality fuel like nuts, seeds, whole grains, lean meats, things like that.
Okay. Katie, you had a lot of interesting things on your blog there. One of them that I did want to get you on and talk about just a little bit is testing, exercise testing. What is that, and how could a jiu-jitsu athlete do that?
There's a lot that you can learn from exercise testing. So what we do where I'm at is we're introducing something called sweat concentration testing. And so that will tell you how much sodium you're losing per liter. And that's an interesting test, because the amount of sodium that you lose per liter is genetically predetermined. So it's something that can really vary between athletes. We've tested athletes that are losing 200 milligrams per liter and those that are losing 2,000 milligrams per liter.
Wow.
So understanding that is really interesting, because it can tell you kind of the concentration that you need in your sports beverages. It can also tell you, if you're a really salty sweater, that you need to really kind of prepare for that and think about that during a competition day. So that's one test that I really like doing and I'm excited about. We also do VO2 max testing, and that is a test to determine, it really determines genetic potential. It determines how efficiently oxygen is circulated to muscles and the things that promote exercise in the body. So that's something where we would put you on a bike, or we would have you run until basically you can't go anymore, until fatigue. And we would see, hey, how efficiently does this person, circulate oxygen in their body, and, where are they in terms of genetic potential? And then the other tests we do are a resting metabolic rate. So we can tell how many calories people burn when they're just laying down, which is basically the amount of calories that you were to burn if you just laid in bed all day. It's kind of what, your heart takes to function, your brain, your lungs. And so if we know that number, then we can more accurately predict how many calories people need in a day, when they're not training, when they are training, et cetera.
Wow. And so if I live near you, great, I'll go in and get tested. But what kind of places do these testings?
Well, there's a lot of exercise physiology places in the country that will do sort of like VO2 max and submax testing that can give you heart rate zones. In terms of the sweat concentration testing, it's something that we can travel with.
Okay.
And so we can go to different places with the equipment and use it in different locations. And there's also, a testing center finder on Precision Hydration's website that talks about different testing centers all over the U.S. But a lot of times we'll travel to training camps and do things like that to be able to test that sweat concentration.
That's interesting. I never have heard of that. And it does make sense if I'm losing literally, some people lose like 10 times as much in their sweat, okay, that person needs to be drinking a lot of energy or a lot of those sports drinks. And if you're kind of just barely losing any, you're good with a lot more water or maybe a diluted one. And that's interesting. Like you learn about, so we talk, I think of this as like, you feed is fuel for like a machine, but it also pays off to learn about the machine that's running the fuel and what it's going to need or do well with. And I think those testing makes it an easy way. I mean, you could also spend, a lot of time experimenting with different amounts of hydration and try to get it down. But it's like you said, it's genetics. Like there's nothing you could change about how much sodium you lose while you sweat. And that's really neat.
Yeah, it's really fun to I'm a nerd, so I really like to learn about it and just to see where my numbers are and where other people's numbers are. But that test can be really, really helpful just in individualization. And, on Precision Hydration's website, they're talking about the MMA fighters that they're working with. So I think it's kind of moving into, grappling and kind of the combat sports. So that's exciting.
Katie, we've talked a lot about, what to do before we show up and what to do like while we're training or competing. After, what's that look like?
So recovery nutrition is really important because it basically ensures that you're getting the most bang for your buck, either from competition or training. And so what you want to do is you want to refill carbohydrate stores or glycogen stores. So you want to have some high quality carbohydrate, and you also want to have some high quality protein. And you want to do that kind of in a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 ratio. So if you are, getting technical, you want to do 1 to 1.2 gram of carbohydrate per kilogram body weight. And then you want to have about 15 to 25 grams of high quality protein. So high quality protein, really the easiest source is to do it through meat because that contains all the essential amino acids. And it also contains a lot of leucine, which is one amino acid, a branched chain amino acid that has been shown to have a particular impact on muscle protein synthesis and muscle adaptation.
So what would be a good way to get that?
Yeah, good question. So one thing that I really like to do is I will have potentially a recovery drink right after a competition when I don't have great access to food. So like I would finish competing, cross the line or finish my match. And then I would have a recovery drink like Cocoa Elite is one of my favorites, or Scratch Recovery. There's a lot of things out there. And you could even do chocolate milk, which in research has been shown to be just as effective. And then, I generally will go to a restaurant with my family and we'll have, some whole grains. So my favorites are like a sweet potato, quinoa, whole grain pasta, things like that. And then I'll have, generally my favorite protein is chicken breast or some ahi tuna. So I'll have some of that. And then I'll also do, just some vegetables like spinach, because generally before a race or on competition day. There's not a lot of vegetables there, and I actually, believe it or not, kind of miss them. And then one last thing that's kind of a new thing is tart cherry juice. So after a huge session, if I feel like I'm going to be sore, I'll take a shot of tart cherry juice, like maybe 4 or 6 ounces. And that has been known to reduce muscle soreness because of the antioxidants that are in just plain tart cherry juice. So that's sort of what my recovery routine looks like.
Cool. That's interesting to see. And I think that we could use that when we step off the mats and when we go home.
Yeah. That sounds great. It's always, you got to pay attention to the recovery just to make sure you're getting everything you can from that training session so that you can come back fitter and stronger.
Yeah. And hopefully train tomorrow. I mean, that's, you want to train to where you could, you're not dead the next day.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the key is, recovering as quickly as you can so that you can go hard again, break muscles down and, make them stronger. So that's kind of the game we all play. Just making sure we stay healthy and, repair and recover our muscles as well as we can so that the next day we can go back and train hard. So, the last thing you really want to think about in terms of recovery nutrition is just hydration. So probably the most scientific way to do this is to weigh before you go and roll and then weigh after. And for every pound you lose, replace each of those pounds with 16 to 24 ounces of fluid, preferably alongside a meal. But, in addition to replenishing carbohydrate and protein, you definitely want to rehydrate because hydration is going to be key to you performing at your best the next day.
Katie, well, I got you here, and we talked a lot about sports nutrition and kind of getting that into jiu-jitsu. We talked a little bit about being a triathlete. If somebody, a lot of us are listening are athletes and looking for things. If somebody wants to kind of just to try their hand at a triathlon, what would you tell them? Like not real serious, but just, hey, I want to give that a go. What kind of advice do you have for somebody who's wanting to do that?
I think it's a great idea. I would say, before you give it a go, just make sure that you've actually gotten into the open water and done that, because it can really be scary. When you're starting a triathlon, there are a lot of people around you. And if you're not used to that, it's really, really unnerving. So I would say, get in the open water. If you're somebody who's not super proficient at swimming, maybe start, like if there's a line of people heading to the buoy, go on the outsides. Basically, you might be swimming a little bit longer, but at least you don't have people swimming over you.
Wow.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things. And then I would say, get a training plan. They have really cheap training plans that you can buy that are just a good guideline for making sure that you show up to the race and you don't have a horrible experience. And then I would say, again, what we talked about today, like if you're going to do something nutrition-wise, just try it before you get to race day.
Great advice. That's interesting. And I've talked about it on previous episodes, and I chatted with you a little bit earlier. I did a relay with my wife, a triathlon, and I did the swim part, and my wife did the bike. We both ran. But it wasn't until I got in the pool at the YMCA, it's like I went 35 or so years thinking I'm a decent swimmer, to trying to swim, a few hundred meters. Like, this is really hard because I'm not swimming recreationally in a pool anymore. I'm trying to swim I was swimming too fast. I was using bad technique and all these things. And it took me a little while, but I got to be to where I was confident that I wouldn't drown in the distance I was going.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think we're going to have to trade because I'm trying to learn to do jiu-jitsu. And if you want to do another triathlon, we can just kind of swap tips.
Sounds like a plan. Where could somebody go keep up with you and or get coaching advice?
So I do some coaching. I take on 15 athletes a year. So I definitely am accepting triathlon clients right now. And if you're looking for something just to learn more about triathlon, triathletemagazine.com, or I think it's triathlete.com now, is a great resource. USA Triathlon is kind of our governing body. So that's a great place to get information and just to learn how to get started in the sport. And then YouTube is always a good option. I think whether you're learning jiu-jitsu or triathlon, it's a great place just to see what swimming technique is and, how you do transitions or, things like that, how you do arm bars, I guess, if we're talking about jiu-jitsu. So those are some good resources, I think.
Cool. Well, I'll put a link to your website, and I think we both recommend the app Marune. It's a great, like we were talking about scientific training and learning, and like the sports testing, that sort of thing. Part of that is logging it and keeping track, and a lot of great resources out there.
Yeah, definitely. Being able to refer back to things is awesome, and then also just having that social encouragement from your friends and staying in touch with your kind of fellow jiu-jitseros is pretty cool. Encouraging. Yeah, absolutely. And we all need that sometimes. So, Katie, it's been a blast. Thanks for jumping on here with me. You are so welcome. Thank you for having me, Byron. I want to thank Katie for hopping on here. Check out the link in the show notes. There's a link to her website, and there's a link to the app Marune. I'm using it. Find me on there. We'll turn it into more of a social thing, and I think that would be a great way to track your training. Guys, you got to try this app on your phone. It logs... It allows you to log your training hours, if it's gi or no gi, how that went, where it was, and what you worked on. And it's just a great way to kind of organize your training and track it. And you think about if you're serious about your training, or you just like to kind of journal things, it's perfect things for you to pick up. But if you're serious about your training, you've got to track it, and you've got to any goal you have that's serious, you need to have things that are trackable that you're obtaining. Like if Gary wants to lose a few pounds, if he starts writing down, this week he weighs this week he weighs this, it's going to make it more easier and simplified for him to do that. And if he gains a couple pounds 1 week, not the end of the world, but he'll note that. If he gains a couple pounds 2 weeks in a row, okay, you've got to buckle down and get back to it. If you've trained 7 hours this week and 7 hours last week, and you trained, 5 hours is what you're going to get this, coming up, make an adjustment, go, do some other type of fitness or something. I don't know. But it's just, I think if you're serious about it, you should be tracking your training. And the app is really cool. And I'll put a link to it in the show notes as well.
And that's awesome. It's perfect for me. I was using an app a while ago, and I don't know if the makers of it or they're no longer a thing, but it got glitchy. It didn't update, and so I've been looking for a new app. I have found tracking it on my phone to be the easiest thing. I know some people like a pencil and paper, but man, my bag's always dirty and sweaty, and so I will definitely be checking this app out and using it.
Yep, I'm just going to spell it real quick here: Marune. And if you find it, or when you download it, find me on there and add me. Just look for BjjBrick. Sorry, gentlemen, took the name. But
I'm going to be BjjBrick 1.
And then, or BjjBrick G, because you're the original G on the show.
There you go.
And BjjBrick Joe. I don't know. Anyway, if you find me, you could probably find them, because if they'll have it by then, they could add me as a friend. But although sometimes Gary doesn't think he's my friend.
Well, what do you expect when you just talked about me needing to use this app to lose a couple pounds? That was your first heckle on me.
That's true. You could, what you could do every, I don't know if it's helpful to track weight loss every day, but you could just put what you weighed in at, if you train every Thursday, put that right there in the app. And there's a little note section. That would be one handy way to do that. I don't know. I think this is, I think we had a few changes that we've seen in the training methods. VHS tapes, that was a big deal. You get a tape of somebody doing some moves, and we let each other borrow it, or Gary hooks up a couple of beta recorders together and copy that sucker. And then DVDs came out, and I remember things like 101 Submissions was a great DVD to watch and try to figure out. And then internet speeds got fast enough that a few websites had some video, and now you got YouTube, and you have world-class coaches and athletes teaching stuff on YouTube. The next step is going to be an app that helps you train. So check this one out and see if it helps you train.
Yeah, I'll be doing a review of an app I downloaded recently by, it's a Stephen Kesting product, but it's Brandon Mullins that's doing the instruction. And I'm telling you, for $6, you can't hardly beat it. I mean, it seems to be the money you would spend previously for DVDs and like I said, the hassle of trying to track down VHS tapes. And there's so much available now. It's awesome.
Joe, what's this? Or I guess I'll wait for your review.
No, I'll tell you. It's okay. BJJ Fundamentals. And actually, I bought it primarily because I've consumed so much content that Stefan's put out for free, and I was looking for a way to support him. And so I started looking through the apps that he had, and this particular one, it's on 4 fundamental movements in BJJ. The technical stand-up, and then he lumps bridging and shrimping together, and then he lumps rolling together, forward, backwards, and like a sideways roll. And then he calls it the butt scoot double, but kind of where you go from your back up to one knee, and then you could do a double leg from there.
Yep.
And then he goes through all the different scenarios that you actually use these from in jiu-jitsu. And as a purple belt, I'm getting something out of it. But, man, I think for white belts it would be gold, because how many white belts bridge, shrimp, roll, and they don't really know why they're doing it, except it's part of the warm-up in class. And I think when you can put it all together and see how it really works in live rolling, it's very helpful, I think.
Yeah, that definitely sounds interesting, and that's kind of what piqued my interest to ask you about it. I want to know what this is, and definitely check it out here in the future when Joe will have a review on it. And let's learn some fundamentals.
Yeah, Joe, you said something interesting. You've consumed so much stuff for free from Stephen Kesting, grapplearts.com. You felt like, hey, I should check something out and support the person, and it was great. We have a similar thing on BjjBrick. If you really love the podcast and you want to support us, Patreon.com is, that's not the best way to find it. Patreon.com/BjjBrick is, I guess, a way you can find it, or you can go to the show notes and find it through there. But we have a Patreon page, which is great for supporting content producers like podcasters or people who make videos or whatever it is that you enjoy. And you could pledge $1 or $2 or $3 per episode, and every time an episode comes out, it makes a little note, and then at the end of the month, it charges you the amount that up to you can put a limit on there too, a cap that you want to support us with. It means a ton. We want to give a shout to a few Patreon supporters: Nathan, Mindy, and Caleb, and Lindy. And man, thank you so much for the support, guys. It means a ton to us, and the show literally, I think, would have been gone by now without the support of our Patreon supporters. So they have saved the show. They've definitely helped it grow and become bigger and better, and they often are a great source of motivation on days that are a little difficult. So thank you guys for the support, both that you get financially and emotionally, and it's a pat on the back when somebody signs up and says, "Hey, I want to support you guys every show you make." That means a lot. So thanks, guys. And if you do sign up, I almost forgot the actual benefits you get. We'll send you out a 5-inch BjjBrick key patch. We'll mail you a sticker, and you get to join the private Facebook group if you like, where you can chat with us with the other Patreon supporters there. And actually, next week's interview came off of a recommendation from Nathan on there. So excited to bring you guys that one. And Nathan got to us through the Patreon page. Through the Facebook page that he got through. I'm confused.
No, but that's awesome. Like you said, next week's interview is through Nathan, sending us a message on Facebook to, hey, this guy would be a great interview. And, it kind of takes me back to, Joe here. Joe does not live in Wichita, Kansas with Byron and I. He's in Houston, Texas, which is south of us by many hours. But, Joe started sending us messages, bjjbrick@gmail.com, hit us up on the Facebook page, started writing articles for, jiu-jitsu articles. And, we thought they were awesome and kind of shared them on our page. And then one day we got Joe to come on to the podcast. Joe is a writer, as a jiu-jitsu guy. He's a mariner, never been on a podcast before. He kind of got outside of his comfort zone. And, and here we are, history. Joe's part of the Three Musketeers here. And, this week we got another article from the one, the only, Joe Thomas. Joe, let's tell us about your article.
Let me say, first of all, let me say two things. First, you are the segue king. That was smooth. But touching back to Patreon, I'm sure that Gary, Byron, and I could have scraped the money together ourselves. And it's not like Byron sent me an entire recording studio. But when I started to be on the show more, I know Byron used a little bit of the Patreon funds to send me a recording device and a microphone, and it's been very helpful. And so I can just speak for myself, not for the podcast. I very much appreciate the Patreon support. It's made it easier for me to become a part of the team. So thank you guys so much. Now on to the article. Never underestimate the value of your comfort zone. This idea was kind of inspired by a guest that we had recently. I was able to interview Jeff Westfall. He's got a podcast, and one of the podcast episodes was entitled "There's a Box There for a Reason," and it kind of had to do with that thinking outside of the box has its value, but don't forget that there was a box there originally for a reason. Whatever you were doing inside that box was working. And it's very common nowadays to hear people talk about growth happens outside of your comfort zone, and that's very much true. But growth also happens inside your comfort zone. And one thing I was thinking about, if you go read the article, I talked a little bit about kids that do well in school. It's generally because they have a good, solid comfort zone at home. People that do well at work, it's generally because they have a very comfortable work environment. They're not worried about getting fired every other day. They don't have a boss that's berating them. The compensation package is good, whatever. They're comfortable at work, and people that are comfortable at work, you generally have a more productive workforce. And I don't think jiu-jitsu is unlike that. I think that if you have a good teammate or good teammates around you, a good coach, a steady school that you really like, you enjoy being there, I think that leads towards growth. And so don't be so worried about going outside of your comfort zone that you neglect growing within your comfort zone. I think I kind of ended the article with sort of this idea that when you do step outside of your comfort zone, you don't have to just go all out and completely abandon your comfort zone. You can sort of step outside your comfort zone within your comfort zone, or take your comfort zone with you. I don't know if that makes sense, but a couple examples would be, if it's come to your attention, whether you just figured it out yourself or maybe suggestions from friends and teammates, that you're somebody that might benefit from competing. That would be stepping outside of your comfort zone, and it would do you some good. There's two ways you could do that. You could just look for the very next BJJ tournament and enter it, whether you're ready or whether any teammates were going, whatever. You could just jump in with both feet. Or you could look a few months down the road and find a tournament that your school is going to as a team. And then when you are subjecting yourself to a higher intensity training level, you're doing that with your team. Everybody's kind of in it together. And when you go to the tournament, you've got to figure out the weigh-in process. You got to figure out where your brackets and your mats are. You've got teammates around you helping you. Whether you win or lose, you've got teammates that are celebrating with you or encouraging you through the defeat. So you can step outside of your comfort zone and still bring some of the support system with you. That's the way I would suggest that you do it. If you're wanting to learn new techniques and maybe you just moved to a new city, that might not be the time to retool your game if you're just starting at a new gym. You might want to spend some time developing relationships, getting to know the coach, and developing a good comfort zone there, and then starting to retool your game. So I don't discount the value of being outside the comfort zone. In fact, what I would end with is just saying, I think a good mix of both is probably the best way to go.
This is a great article, Joe. I think it's commonly said learning takes place outside the comfort zone. That's, if you think about it, it's kind of lazy to say that. You do a great job of explaining you need like a home base. You need something that it's a safe place to train. You know that your coach is going to be mad at you if you lose, and you need something. It could be different for everybody, but you need to have some sort of like a comfort zone to have an effective learning environment. And then you need to sometimes step out of that, not that comfort zone, but step into something that you're not necessarily comfortable doing within that thing. Like competing is a common one. When people go compete, my biggest worry, especially if it's the first competition, is if they do poorly, they don't come back. Like, that's a concern, because I'd rather them not compete at all. If that's a possibility, wait another 6 months or a year before you compete. I don't want you to compete once, get a loss or two, and then be done thinking that you're terrible at jiu-jitsu. No, you're not terrible at jiu-jitsu. You just got matched up with somebody who, another, let's just say, white belt that had 6 months more experience than you, or maybe wrestled before they got, into jiu-jitsu or whatever. Although the experience may not have been fun, I want you to stay within the comfort zone of, your coaches aren't going to be upset with you for losing that match. We want you to come back and train and get better, have more fun, and continue to develop in jiu-jitsu. So I think that them understanding that is like a type of a comfort zone. Also, like certain training partners, we all have these. You feel really comfortable training with certain people. If Joe gets side control on me, it's going to be a pretty miserable experience for a little while. If Gary gets side control on me, I know I'm going to be doing pretty good. I'm pretty happy. He didn't really put any pressure on me.
Oh, thank you.
But I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. So I know, okay, maybe today I'm not really feeling up to dealing with Joe's side control. But when I roll with Gary, maybe he gets that and I don't stress so much about it. It's just, I think different teammates kind of bring a different, as you get to know them and work with them, you get to know, okay, if I'm going to work mountain escapes today, who would that be with? And it's not necessarily the worst person on the mat. It might be the best person on the mat because they're not going to smash you for the entire time they're on you. They're going to let you work. They're going to, I like to talk about rewinding the tape. Like, you didn't quite escape, but you almost did. Let's stop and rewind it and try that again. And just, there's different things to do and to think about with comfort zones. But I think it's lazy to say, get outside your comfort zone. Yeah, you can learn a lot outside your comfort zone. But if you have no comfort zone at all, no home base to work within, I think it's like trying to hit a baseball that's being pitched by somebody who's throwing 100 miles an hour. I will never hit that ball, and if I do, it won't be technically sound. I'm swinging that bat so far out of my skill level, I'm not learning anything. Like going to box with somebody who's Mike Tyson, I'm not going to learn anything. It's too far outside of where my ability is. So I think having 1 foot in, 1 foot out, or having that stable home base, that's a great concept, Joe, and I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I like the way you worded that idea of having a home base. I think that's pretty much what I was getting at. And you can't step outside of your comfort zone if you don't have one to begin with. So
I thought you were going to say, you like the way I worded that, the side control example.
No, well, speaking of side control, note to self, I'm going to have Joe give me a private lesson. I'm not using enough pressure. So I'll be hitting you up for that, Joe.
Yeah, you got to perfect transitioning from knee on belly to knee on neck and just grind it.
But no, definitely check out this article. Never underestimate the value of the comfort zone by the one and only Joe Thomas. And the crazy thing is we always have a part of the show where we have a fake audio book. It's just a little our attempt of humor. It never actually comes to fruition. But
the humor part never comes to fruition, or the book.
Well, probably both of them. But Byron actually has it on here that he actually wanted to talk about his new audio book. Never underestimate the value of the comfort binky while doing jiu-jitsu. Byron, if you've ever rolled with him, you'll notice he's always got a binky, one of those kids' pacifiers that you put in your mouth.
Okay.
And Byron always has that while he's rolling. And, the crazy thing is, people look at Byron and they'll see him over in the corner. If he has the binky in, he has the binky in. If not, he's sucking his thumb. And a lot of times people don't want to roll with him. But once they get to know Byron, he's a good guy. And, binky aside, they'll roll with him. But the crazy thing is, he's actually learned through years, because he's, has a comfort zone and he stepped outside of it a little bit. He's actually learned how to use that binky to his advantage and make him a better jiu-jitsu guy. And Byron, just tell us a little bit about this and, what you do to use that to your advantage.
Yeah, it's okay. First off, I was still thrown off by what a binky actually was. For a minute, I thought it was the type of a blanket.
Byron does not have kids.
Yeah.
A pacifier is what we're talking about here. Okay, that's great. And yeah, Gary is dead on. There's a lot of ways you could use a pacifier or binky, if that's what they're calling it now these days, while you're grappling. And just imagine all the ways that it's been attached to somebody else. And you put it in their ear. That's the only one I can think of that I could say on the podcast. But just
I know
think about the ear.
You called that the wet willy, and I thought that was a great name for it.
Yeah, and then the other one, I won't describe it, but it's called Binky Stinky, and it rhymes, and that's why I went with that. The book is relatively short, and it's a picture book because it's really I don't know.
You got to show how to do it.
It's a book about a binky. It's got to be a picture book.
Yeah, but I really like the part when you talk about blinding your opponent. With the binky. Tell us how you do that.
Well, that's interesting idea there. It requires the double binky, which, strangely enough, costs more than twice as much as a single binky. But you're able to get it in their eyes and then put some adhesive on there. And it's just a disaster for them. And it's actually been, I almost didn't make the book because it's been outlawed as far as a legal technique goes.
It's not BjjF legal?
It's definitely not. And in fact, the whole binky thing is questionable at this point. They let me, a lot of times they'll just wear the mouthpiece, but it's not nearly as good as the binky. You want the impression that it's actually like a nipple in there. That's what the kids want, because that's why it pacifies them. But some binkies have like fake teeth, so when you look at the kid, you see their teeth.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so I went with some fake teeth binky. That worked out okay. And then different belt levels. So, the teeth start off white belt level. Blue teeth, those aren't really selling that well. Purple teeth and brown teeth, not so much. Black teeth, it's hard to sell a black tooth binky to anybody. But I've made a bunch of them and have them in my house. I figured the best way to get rid of these would be with a book like this and maybe get these this product to move, because they're just not going.
Byron, in your book, you had a little cautionary tale.
That's true.
Maybe you could elaborate on a little bit. You use the binky as a mouth guard when the match gets intense. And you had a cautionary tale on there about not forgetting when you've used your binky for the binky stinky.
Yeah, that's literally a little cautionary tale, like you're telling about. Tale, not like a story, but a tale. So have your binkies marked. It's difficult because you have to start with the binky in your mouth. If it comes out of there, you want to be very careful whether it should go back in. That's basically it. There's also a thing when the rare situation where your opponent has a binky as well, you don't want to get them switched. It's kind of like if you're both blue belts and you're rolling and the belts come off, get your right belt. You might think you're gaining a lot of weight if you pick up the wrong belt.
Good point.
Yeah.
Byron, when Joe and I, before we were going to put this DVD on the market, we actually took it to a focus group. And one thing we kept getting from the focus group is, how do you actually breathe out there on the mat, with the binky or the binky stinky in there? Like, how do you breathe? Mostly through my nose. I have a quite large nose, Gary.
If you so this is a different topic here, but meeting listeners, and sometimes I meet listeners with Gary, hey, they meet us at the same time. That's awesome. And they always say I look like the big nose guy that's on the cartoon, and Gary, that's Gary. Like,
nobody recognizes me.
There's you don't have quite the distinct the features, the ethnic looking features that I possess. So
are you saying that you have to have a little more developed nose to really excel while rolling with a binky?
Well, it's important to be able to breathe with your mouth closed while you're exercising. Okay. And if you have to tone it down a little bit and move a little more slowly, that's an option as well. But if you want a high pace with the binky in, be ready. Another thing, the binky...
Are you saying you benefit from additional nostril volume?
That is correct.
And, the one thing we were talking about, so let's say you have a small nose with with, small nasal passages.
Typical mouth breather.
If you start, training with this binky, will you evolve and grow gills? Have you thought about that?
So here's part of the thing on that. If that's what you want, the gills aren't going to happen, but you could possibly change the size of your nose. It's going to require the triple binky, one for your mouth and then one for each nostril. And that could stretch them out, really get that airflow in there. It does make a big difference in air intake. And air's fuel for the machine. This whole episode we talked about fueling your body with nutrition and hydration and different, chemicals that are happening in your body. Very sciencey. But air is important to the mix. If you don't have enough air, your machine's not going to work very well. And getting those big nostrils stretched out with the binky is a great way to do that.
Man, that's a heck of an audio book. Look for
Picture
it.
book.
Picture book. Look for it just before Christmas. It'll be a great present for all your buddies who train jiu-jitsu.
Yep, I'm partnering with Toys R Us. And they're in Chapter 11 bankruptcy right now, I believe. So
no wonder
it's kind of falling apart.
Yeah, recently they started making some very bad decisions.
Yeah, I think I might have been the last brick in the wall to be pulled out of the Toys R Us wall. But check it out. And that was my attempt at a poorly constructed audiobook. Check us out on social media. Joe, what's happening on Facebook?
Well, we're trying to stay active and post something every day that you might find encouraging or humorous. So, check us out there. Check out our YouTube channel. I think Byron's starting to post on Instagram every now and then. And we have an app. And if you don't want to have to get a podcast player on your phone or anything of that nature, you can just put the app on your phone and you'll get every episode as it comes out.
Check us out next week. We have an interview with Evan Robinson. This interview was recommended by Patreon supporter Nathan. Thanks so much, Nathan. This was one of the most interesting, heart-touching stories I've heard from the jiu-jitsu community. I read an article about him that Nathan sent me and contacted him. He's happy to share the story. But he's had quite a journey, and he's really a motivated person to help people live better lives with jiu-jitsu. So when I hung up with Evan, I went to him, that was an amazing person to talk to about jiu-jitsu. So tune in next week. Get your dial set, Gary, to the right radio station.
Well, I have the app, Byron, so I don't have to worry about that.
Thank goodness you've got the app. Make it easy for this guy. But the interview with Evan is something that I not to talk about anything, but we could have 10 black belts on. They all give great advice, and you can learn something from every one of them. But in 6 months, you might forget who you learned what from. You're not going to forget Evan's story. So we're happy to bring that to you guys, and it's an honor to have him on the show next week. Stay sweaty, my friends.
And don't forget to shower.
Train hard, train smart, get better, and tune into WKRP in Cincinnati.
Thank you for listening. I hope you find the time today to roll. After all, the best way to get better at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.